The rope felt like a snake in her hands. Not just any snake. A hangman's noose. Aurora Zimmerman arrived at Willow Creek Ranch with a single leather trunk, a teaching certificate from Boston, and a secret that could get her buried in the unforgiving Colorado dirt. She stood there, frozen, the lead rope for her horse burning her palms, her mind screaming. She wasn't just scared of it. She was terrified. A deep voice cut through the cold air. "Miss, you're holding that rope like it's gonna bite." She spun around. A man leaned against the corral fence, tall and broad, a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. He watched her, not with amusement, but with a quiet intensity that set her teeth on edge. He saw too much. He already saw too much. She forced her voice to be steady, the way her father had taught her. "Never show weakness. Never." "I'm perfectly capable, thank you." Her knuckles were bone white. The lie was so thin it was transparent. He pushed off the fence and walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. He took off his hat, revealing dark hair and eyes that seemed to drink the last of the evening light. "Xavier Sullivan. I'm the foreman here." He gave a short, polite nod. His gaze never left the rope in her hands. "Aurora Zimmerman," she said, her voice clipped. "I'm here for the teaching position." A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise? No, it was something else, something calculating. All the way from Boston. That's a long ride for a schoolmarm. He wasn't just making conversation. He was digging. She squared her shoulders, a trick she'd perfected to look taller, more confident than she felt. "Distance is merely geography, Mr. Sullivan. My qualifications don't change with the longitude." A slow smile spread across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let me help you with that," he said, nodding at the rope she was strangling. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved in close, his hands covering hers on the rough hemp. His touch was warm, firm, and for a second it felt safe. Then his skin touched hers, and the dam inside her broke. Panic, cold and absolute, shot up her arms. She ripped her hands away like she'd been burned, dropping the rope into the dust. Her horse, Penny, whinnied and shied away from the sudden movement. Aurora stumbled back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was exposed. She was failing the first test. "My apologies," she stammered, backing away. "The journey. I'm tired." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. Xavier didn't smile. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. That look was back in his eyes, that flicker of recognition. He wasn't just a simple foreman. She knew it in her bones. "You're afraid of the rope," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. An accusation. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling. "It's just a rope." He didn't argue. He just bent down, picked up the lead, and tied Penny to the post with a few expert motions. The knot was clean, secure. The kind of knot a man makes when he knows what he's doing. The kind of knot that holds. He knew more about knots than a simple rancher should. "Mrs. Montgomery is waiting for you at the main house," he said, his voice level again. "She's eager to meet the new teacher." Aurora followed him, her mind racing. Every step felt like she was walking toward a trap. She watched the way he moved, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the way he walked with the quiet confidence of a hunter. She was here to hide, to disappear into the vast, empty landscape of Colorado. But she had a terrible sinking feeling that she had just walked straight into the lion's den. And the lion had already scented her fear. The main house was a fortress of timber and stone, a declaration of permanence in a land that swallowed people whole. The woman who met them at the door, Mrs. Montgomery, was the opposite of the house. She was small, with soft, grandmotherly eyes and a warm smile. But as she took Aurora's hands, her grip was surprisingly strong, her eyes sharp and assessing. Nothing about this place was what it seemed. "Miss Zimmerman." What a delight! Your letter spoke with such passion, the old woman chirped. Her warmth felt rehearsed. We've prepared the old foreman's cabin for you. It's small, but quite private. Private. The word hung in the air. Was it a comfort or a warning? Xavier will show you the way, Mrs. Montgomery continued, patting Aurora's hand. Dinner is at 6. The children are just beside themselves. We haven't had a proper teacher in nearly 2 years. 2 years. Why would a prosperous ranch go 2 years without a teacher for its children? The question lodged in Aurora's mind like a splinter. As Xavier led her across the yard to a small, isolated cabin, she felt his eyes on her again. "What is it, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, unable to stand the silence. "Just wondering," he said, his voice a low drawl. "What brings a woman like you out to the middle of nowhere? Most folks come here running from something, or chasing something." Her spine went rigid. "I came to teach. Nothing more." He stopped at the cabin door and turned to face her. The setting sun cast his face in shadow, making him impossible to read. "Everyone has a story out here, Miss Zimmerman," he said softly. "Sooner or later, the land has a way of drawing it out." He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The cabin was clean, cozy, a handmade quilt on the bed, a desk by the window. It should have been welcoming. Instead, it felt like a cage. When he left, Aurora didn't unpack. She sank onto the bed and pulled a small, worn journal from her bag. Her hands shook as she wrote. Day 1. They know. They don't know what, but they know I'm afraid. The foreman, Sullivan. He watches me like a hawk. He says the land draws out stories. I pray it buries them instead. She closed the book, the secret inside it feeling heavier than ever. She hadn't come to Colorado to escape her past. She had come to confront it, and she was beginning to suspect she wasn't the only one here with blood on her hands. The first few days were a blur of false calm. The children were a welcome distraction, a mix of rough-edged ranch kids and the quiet, watchful children of the miners from the nearby hills. They were hungry to learn, and Aurora lost herself in the simple rhythm of teaching arithmetic and spelling. She felt Xavier's eyes on her constantly. He would appear at the schoolhouse door with a basket of apples or a bucket of fresh water, his excuses flimsy. He wasn't being kind. He was observing her, studying her, waiting for her to slip up. She wrote to her sister back in Boston, letters full of cheerful lies about majestic mountains and charming pupils. She left out the part about the foreman who looked at her like he was reading the last page of her story. She left out the cold dread that settled in her stomach every time she saw a coil of rope on a saddle or a clothesline strung between 2 trees. 2 weeks in, the calm shattered. During a riding lesson, a rattlesnake slithered out from under a rock, spooking a young girl's horse. The girl, Mary Turner, was thrown, her small body hitting the hard ground with a sickening crack. Aurora was by her side in an instant. The girl's arm was bent at a horrifying angle. "Emily, ride! Get help!" Aurora shouted to another student. She turned her attention to Mary, who was sobbing in pain and fear. The bone hadn't broken the skin, but it was a bad break. She needed a splint. Now. Thinking fast, she ripped strips from her own petticoat, the fine Boston cotton tearing easily. She found 2 straight, sturdy branches and gently, expertly, began to set the arm. She worked with a detached focus, the chaos around her fading away. This she knew how to do. She had done it before. By the time Xavier arrived with the doctor, the splint was secure, and Mary was calm, sipping water from Aurora's canteen. The doctor grunted in approval. "Fine work, miss. Textbook perfect." Xavier helped lift the little girl onto his horse. His eyes met Aurora's over the saddle. "You've done this before," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a compliment. "There was a factory accident once back home," she said, her voice tight, the practiced lie slipping easily from her lips. "I learned a few things." He just nodded, his expression unreadable, and rode off with the injured child. But Aurora saw the look in his eyes. He didn't believe her, not for a second. And the way she had set that bone, with the practiced hands of a surgeon, hadn't reassured him. It had only made him more suspicious. The woman from Boston who was terrified of a simple rope could set a compound fracture without batting an eye. The two things didn't add up. And Xavier Sullivan was a man who always made the numbers add up. That night, sleep offered no escape. The image of Mary falling was twisted together with older, darker memories. The splintering of wood, the snap of a rope under strain, a man's scream cut short. She was sitting on her porch steps as the sun rose, a cold cup of tea in her hands, when Xavier appeared out of the morning mist, a load of firewood in his arms. He moved with an unnerving silence. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, dropping the wood by her door. She jumped, startled. "I didn't hear you." "Mary's doing fine," he said, settling on the step below her as if he'd been invited. "Doc said your splint likely saved her arm from being permanently damaged." He paused, looking out at the mountains. "When I was 12, I fell out of a hayloft, broke both my arms. Pa said it was God's way of teaching me patience." Despite herself, a small smile touched her lips. "Did it work?" "Not a bit," he grinned, a flash of genuine warmth that caught her off guard. "But I learned something else. Bones heal stronger where they were broken." He turned his head, his gaze sharp and direct. "We're not really talking about Mary, are we?" The warmth vanished. The interrogation was back. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do, Miss Zimmerman." He stood up, his tall frame blocking out the morning sun. "A woman who knows how to set a bone like a battlefield surgeon, but flinches at a horse's lead. A woman who speaks of a simple factory accident, but looks like she's seen the horrors of war." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Who are you running from, Aurora?" Her heart hammered in her chest. He was too close. He saw too much. She had to push him back, create distance. "And who are you, Mr. Sullivan, to ask?" She shot back, her voice colder than she felt. "Just a simple foreman who happens to move like a tracker and ask questions like a lawman." His eyes narrowed. She'd hit a nerve. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his expression. Not suspicion, but caution. He had a secret, too. This whole ranch was drowning in them. "This is a hard country," he said, his voice level once more. "Secrets get people killed out here. I'd hate to see that happen to our new schoolteacher." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her alone on the porch, her hands trembling, the unspoken threat hanging in the air between them. He wasn't just watching her anymore. He was warning her. A week later, Mrs. Montgomery announced a community barn dance. "To celebrate the harvest and properly welcome you, my dear," she'd said, her smile as bright and brittle as thin ice. Aurora knew it was a test, a performance. She had to play the part of the happy, settled schoolteacher or risk exposing the truth. The entire ranch would be there. The miners, the other ranch hands, and the town sheriff who Mrs. Montgomery mentioned was making a special trip out. Another coincidence that felt anything but. The night of the dance, lanterns cast a golden glow over the yard, and the lively music of a fiddle filled the air. Aurora forced herself to smile, to chat with her students' parents, to accept a cup of punch from a shy ranch hand. She even let herself be pulled into a swirling folk dance, the movement a welcome distraction from the knot of anxiety in her stomach. From across the yard she saw Xavier watching her. He wasn't dancing. He was leaning against a post, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her. He was talking to the sheriff, a big man with a handlebar mustache and cold, calculating eyes. They both looked her way, and the sheriff nodded slowly. Later, as she tried to catch her breath by the punch bowl, Xavier appeared at her elbow. "You dance well for a city girl," he said. "And you spy well for a foreman," she retorted without thinking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Just keeping an eye on things." Across the yard, a group of children started a game of jump rope. Two older girls turned a long rope while others lined up to jump in. As the rope began to slap rhythmically against the dirt, Aurora froze. The cheerful shouts of the children faded into a dull roar in her ears. The rhythmic slap, slap, slap of the rope was the sound of a heart beating its last. "There it is again." Xavier's voice was quiet, right beside her ear. "That look." She couldn't tear her eyes away from the swinging rope. It was a pendulum counting down the seconds of a life. "You're very observant, Mr. Sullivan." "It's my job," he said, "noticing things. Like how the previous teacher, Mr. Abernathy, left in the middle of the night 2 years ago without his last month's pay. Left everything behind. Or how this ranch, despite being one of the most profitable in the territory, can't seem to keep good help." His voice was low, meant for her alone. Or how a new school teacher arrives from Boston with no references to speak of, just a letter of introduction from a clergyman who, I discovered via telegram, passed away 5 years ago. The blood drained from her face. It was a trap. The whole thing was a trap. The job, the welcome, the dance, it was all designed to corner her. She felt the sheriff's eyes on her from across the yard. "I watch you, Miss Zimmerman," Xavier continued, his voice relentless, "because you're a piece of a puzzle I'm trying to solve. You're brave and smart, and you're a damn good teacher. But you're also lying, and I need to know why." He took a step back, his face hardening. "Because the man who disappeared from this ranch wasn't just a teacher. He was my brother." The world tilted on its axis. His brother. The teacher before her was his brother. He wasn't just a suspicious foreman. He was here for revenge, and he thought she was involved. The fiddle music suddenly sounded like a funeral dirge. She looked from Xavier's accusing face to the sheriff, who was now slowly walking toward them, his hand resting casually on the butt of his pistol. She hadn't just walked into a lion's den. She had walked into a trap set for a killer. And tonight, they had decided she was the prey. "Sheriff Bennett," Xavier said as the lawman approached, his voice hard as iron, "I think Miss Zimmerman has something she'd like to tell us." Aurora's mind raced. They had her cornered. Her forged letter, her fear, her suspicious skills. It all painted a picture of guilt. Running was impossible. Lying was no longer an option. There was only one path left, a piece of the truth, a piece just large enough to save her neck. "Your brother," she said, her voice shaking but clear, forcing herself to meet Xavier's gaze. "He wrote to me before he disappeared. He uncovered something. Something dangerous about this ranch. He said the owner, Mr. Montgomery, didn't die of a fever like everyone believes." The sheriff stopped dead in his tracks. Xavier's expression went from cold certainty to stone-cold shock. This wasn't the confession they were expecting. "He said Mr. Montgomery was murdered," Aurora continued, her voice gaining strength. "And your brother was killed because he found the proof." She had their attention. She'd thrown a wrench into their perfectly constructed trap. But in saving herself from one predator, she just announced her presence to a much more dangerous one. Somewhere in the shadows of the cheerful party, the real killer was listening. And now they knew who she was, and what she knew. The sheriff pulled her and Xavier away from the party into the dark office of the main house. The air grew thick with cigar smoke and suspicion. "Murdered," Sheriff Bennett repeated, his folksy demeanor gone, replaced by the sharp edge of a career lawman. "The doctor signed the death certificate himself, natural causes." "The doctor was paid off, or threatened," Aurora insisted. That's what your brother Daniel believed. He found a ledger, a shipping manifest that didn't add up. Willow Creek wasn't just shipping cattle. It was shipping gold, undeclared, from an illegal mine in the hills. Mr. Montgomery found out and confronted his partner, and he paid for it with his life. Xavier stared at her, his face a mask of conflict. My brother never mentioned a partner. He didn't know who it was, Aurora admitted. That's what he was trying to figure out when he disappeared. He sent me a copy of the manifest, hidden in a letter. He asked me to take it to the Pinkertons if he went silent for more than a month. This part was a lie, a desperate gamble. There was no letter, no manifest, only the things Daniel had told her in hushed tones before she fled Boston. "Where is this letter?" the sheriff demanded. "I destroyed it," she said quickly. "I was scared. When I heard Daniel was missing, I thought they might come after me next. I invented the story about the clergyman, created a new identity. I came here not to expose a crime, but to hide. I took the teaching job because I thought it was the last place anyone would look for a witness to a murder." Xavier's eyes searched hers, looking for the lie. "And the rope?" he asked quietly. "What does that have to do with any of this?" The air left her lungs. This was the part she couldn't fake, the truth that was etched into her soul. The man who killed Mr. Montgomery. He came for Daniel. I was there. I was visiting. We were close. She couldn't bring herself to tell him the whole truth, that they were to be married. I didn't see the killer's face, but I saw what he used. A garrote, made from a thin braided rope. He left it behind. The memory flooded back, vivid and horrifying. The overturned furniture, the silence, the rope coiled on the floor like a sated viper. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire. The sheriff chewed on his unlit cigar, his eyes narrowed in thought. Xavier looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He had spent 2 years hunting his brother's killer, believing it was a simple case of a man who stumbled upon a secret. Now he was faced with a far darker story, and the woman he suspected was at the heart of it all. "If you're telling the truth," the sheriff said slowly, "then you're in more danger now than you ever were before. The killer is still on this ranch, and now he knows you're here." Suddenly, a loud crash came from outside, followed by shouting. The three of them rushed out of the office. The barn, the center of the evening's festivities, was engulfed in flames. Panic erupted as people scrambled away from the blaze. But it wasn't just a fire. It was a message, a diversion. In the confusion, Xavier grabbed her arm. "Where were you staying?" "The old foreman's cabin." His face went pale. "It's a fire trap. Isolated. They weren't trying to burn the barn. They were trying to flush you out, or burn you in your sleep." He scanned the crowd, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol at his hip. The killer wasn't just listening. He was acting. Now. The fire was a distraction, a way to create chaos and isolate her. Xavier shoved her toward the main house. "Stay with Mrs. Montgomery. Don't leave her side." But as Aurora ran, she saw the old woman's face, illuminated by the firelight. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't shouting for water or helping the injured. She was standing perfectly still, a small, cold smile on her lips, her eyes fixed on the burning barn with a look of grim satisfaction. And Aurora knew with sickening certainty. The kindly old widow wasn't her protector. She was the one who had just tried to have her killed. The ranch was a powder keg, and the fuse was lit. Aurora found herself a prisoner in the main house, under the watchful eye of the woman she now knew was a monster. Mrs. Montgomery played the part of the concerned matriarch perfectly, fussing over Aurora, bringing her tea, lamenting the terrible accident. But her eyes were cold, her smile a predatory slash. Every sip of tea felt like it could be poisoned. Every creak of the floorboards at night sounded like the approach of an assassin. Xavier and the sheriff were caught in a deadly game. They knew the killer was on the ranch, but they had no proof. Accusing the respected owner of Willow Creek without evidence was impossible. They were forced to pretend everything was normal while they watched and waited. Xavier's demeanor toward Aurora had changed completely. The suspicion was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective intensity. He found ways to speak to her in secret, brief, whispered conversations behind the stables or in the shadow of the smokehouse. "She's the partner," Aurora told him, her voice barely a whisper. "Her husband found out about the illegal mine, and she had him killed. Then she killed your brother when he got too close." "It makes a twisted kind of sense," Xavier admitted, his jaw tight with rage. "She inherits everything, controls the entire operation from behind the facade of a grieving widow." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a pain that mirrored her own. Daniel was a good man. He trusted people. He would have trusted her. Their shared grief and shared danger forged a bond between them, a fragile trust in a world of lies. He taught her to shoot the pistol he slipped her, the cold, heavy metal a small comfort against the constant fear. They were two lonely souls trapped in a web of deceit, and they only had each other. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath. Autumn arrived, painting the aspens in brilliant, fiery colors, a beautiful mask for the ugliness hiding beneath. The tension on the ranch was unbearable. Ranch hands exchanged nervous glances, their loyalty divided. Some were clearly in Mrs. Montgomery's pocket, their eyes hard and watchful. Others seemed uneasy, aware that something was deeply wrong. One crisp October morning, Xavier found Aurora by the creek. "We need the ledger," he said, his voice urgent. "Without it, her word against ours is meaningless. Daniel must have hidden it somewhere before he was killed." "He wouldn't have hidden it on the ranch," Aurora reasoned. "It would be the first place they'd look. He would have put it somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't think to search." They brainstormed, thinking of places Daniel might have gone. A hidden cave, a loose stone in the schoolhouse fireplace. Nothing felt right. Then Aurora remembered something, a story Daniel had told her about a place he went when he needed to think, a place of treacherous beauty. "The ravine," she whispered. "He told me about a rope bridge over a deep ravine at the edge of the property. He said it was dangerous, but the view was clarifying." Xavier's face lit up with grim understanding. "The old bridge to the north pasture. It's barely used anymore. No one would ever think to look there." They had to go. Now, before Mrs. Montgomery realized they were getting too close to the truth. They rode out under the guise of checking the fences, the cool autumn air doing nothing to quell the frantic beating of Aurora's heart. As they approached the ravine, a vast chasm that split the earth, she saw it, the bridge, a rickety-looking span of wood and rope, swaying gently in the wind. Her breath caught in her throat. "I can't," she whispered, pulling her horse to a halt. The sight of the thick support ropes, the very things meant to provide safety, sent a jolt of pure terror through her. "Aurora, listen to me," Xavier said, dismounting and coming to her side. His voice was firm but gentle. "This is it. This is our only chance. The proof we need is likely on the other side. You can do this." He held out his hand. "I'll be right beside you." She looked from his outstretched hand to the swaying bridge. It was a choice. Stay here, trapped in her fear, and let the killers win, or walk across that bridge and fight for justice, for Daniel, for herself. Her terror was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing her heart. But the image of Daniel's kind face and the thought of Mrs. Montgomery's cruel smile was stronger. Slowly, she dismounted. She couldn't bring herself to touch the rope railings. Instead, she took Xavier's hand. His grip was strong, steady, a lifeline. "Don't look down," he said softly. "Just look at me." They took the first step onto the bridge. It swayed, groaning under their weight. Aurora's legs trembled, but she held onto Xavier's hand, focusing on his eyes, drawing strength from his calm. They were halfway across when they heard it. The unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, fast, from the direction of the ranch. They'd been followed. "They know," she breathed, panic rising. "Faster," Xavier urged, pulling her along. They reached the other side just as two riders appeared at the opposite edge of the ravine. They were ranch hands, two of Mrs. Montgomery's most loyal men. One of them raised a rifle. A shot rang out, splintering the wooden plank right beside Aurora's foot. She screamed and stumbled back, her hands flying out to steady herself. Her fingers brushed against the thick braided support rope of the bridge. The texture, the feel of it. It was like being struck by lightning. The memory she had buried, the one too horrible to face, exploded in her mind. It wasn't a garrote she had seen in Daniel's room. It was this exact type of rope. One of the killer's hands had been burned, a deep friction burn from where the rope had been pulled taut. A rope burn, like the one she'd glimpsed on the hand of a man she'd danced with at the barn dance, a man who was supposed to be on their side. Sheriff Bennett. The betrayal was so profound, so complete, it stole the air from her lungs. The sheriff wasn't helping them. He was Mrs. Montgomery's partner. He had been playing them the entire time, gathering their information, learning what they knew, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate them. The fire, the investigation, it was all a charade. Another shot kicked up dirt near Xavier's feet. "The ledger has to be here," he yelled, pulling her behind a cluster of boulders. "Look for a loose rock, anything." While Xavier returned fire with his pistol, keeping the men pinned down, Aurora frantically searched the rocky outcrop near the bridge's anchor point. Her fingers scrabbled at the stones, her mind reeling. The sheriff. The man they trusted. He was the one. He had the rope burn. Her fingers found it. A flat stone that shifted under her touch. She pried it loose. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thin leather-bound ledger. Daniel's proof. She pulled it out just as Xavier grunted in pain. He stumbled back, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt. He was hit. "Xavier." "I'm all right," he grits out, firing another shot. "Did you find it?" "I have it." "Go," he commanded. "Get back to town. Don't trust anyone. Get this to the U.S. Marshals in Denver." The two men on the other side of the bridge started to cross, moving from cover to cover. They were trapped. Xavier was wounded, and they were outgunned. Leaving him was unthinkable, but staying meant they would both die, and the truth would die with them. Then she looked at the bridge, at the thick, sturdy ropes anchoring it to the rock, the ropes she had feared for so long. She saw a new path, not escape, vengeance. "They need the bridge to get to us," she said, her voice filled with a new, icy calm. She pulled a hunting knife from the sheath on Xavier's saddle. "I'm going to take it away from them." Before Xavier could protest, she scrambled to the edge, the ledger tucked safely inside her jacket. She began hacking at the main support rope. The hemp was thick, tough. Her arms ached with the effort, but adrenaline and fury fueled her. Splinters of rope flew into the air. One of the men on the bridge saw what she was doing and yelled, starting to run toward her. "Aurora, no!" Xavier cried, trying to give her cover, but he was weakening. The rope began to fray, the thick strands groaning in protest. With one final desperate hack, the rope snapped. The bridge shuddered violently, dropping several feet on one side. The man running toward her screamed as he lost his footing, clawing at the air before plummeting into the ravine below. The second man, closer to the other side, scrambled back to safety. She had done it. She had faced her fear and turned it into a weapon. But they were still trapped. One man was dead, but the other was still there, rifle in hand. And Xavier was bleeding badly, leaning against the rocks, his face pale. They had bought themselves time, but they were stranded on the wrong side of a chasm, with a killer waiting on the other. The cold Colorado wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of pine and blood. They had the proof, but they were going to die with it. Night fell like a shroud over the ravine. The cold was a physical enemy, seeping into their bones. Aurora tore strips from her remaining petticoat to bandage Xavier's shoulder, but the bleeding was sluggish to stop, and he was growing weaker, shivering uncontrollably. The lone gunman on the other side was still there, a patient predator waiting for them to make a move or for reinforcements to arrive. They were pinned down, the ledger a useless trophy. "We have to get off this ledge," Xavier whispered, his voice hoarse. "He's just waiting for sunrise." Aurora scanned the cliff face. It was steep, almost sheer in places, but below them the ravine snaked its way through the mountains. "The water," she said, her mind racing. "If we can get down to the creek at the bottom of the ravine, we can follow it. It has to lead somewhere." "It's a 50-foot drop," Xavier said, his teeth chattering. "And there's only one rope left." He nodded toward the remaining support rope for the now useless bridge, still anchored to the rock. The thought of lowering herself into that black abyss, hand over hand on that single strand of hemp, made her stomach clench with a familiar, sickening terror. But then she looked at Xavier, his face pale in the moonlight, his life bleeding out into the cold dirt. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her gut, but something else was stronger, a defiant rage. They would not end like this. "Then that's what we'll use," she said, her voice firm. She retrieved the rope, its rough texture a familiar enemy under her hands. She looped it around a sturdy rock outcropping, testing its hold. It was long enough, just barely. "I can't climb," Xavier breathed. "My shoulder. I'll just pull you down with me." "You won't have to climb," she said, her mind working with a desperate clarity born of necessity. She tied one end of the rope securely around his waist, under his good arm. "I'm going to lower you down. Then I'll follow. Aurora, you don't have the strength." "Watch me," she said, her jaw set. She braced her feet against the rocks, the rope wrapped around her hands, and began to slowly, carefully play out the line. Xavier's dead weight was immense. The rope burned her palms, scraping them raw. Every inch was a battle. Her muscles screamed, her back felt like it was splitting in two, but she held on, her gaze fixed on the darkness below, her mind focused on one thing: survival. When she felt the rope go slack, she knew he had reached the bottom. A wave of relief, so intense it almost made her collapse, washed over her. But she wasn't done yet. Now it was her turn. She untied the rope, secured it again, and took a deep breath. She looked across the ravine one last time at the lone figure silhouetted against the night sky. Then she leaned back and pushed off the ledge, rappelling down into the darkness, the rope her only connection to life. The descent was a nightmare of swinging momentum and jarring impacts against the rock face. But she didn't let go. When her feet finally touched the rocky creek bed, her legs gave out, and she collapsed next to Xavier. He was conscious, but barely. The water was icy, numbing her feet instantly. They had to move. Supporting most of his weight, she helped him stumble down the creek, the freezing water a constant, agonizing shock. They moved through the darkness, hour after torturous hour. Aurora's world shrank to the next step, and the one after that. She talked to Xavier constantly, keeping him conscious, telling him stories of Boston, of her dreams, anything to keep his mind from slipping away into the blackness of hypothermia and blood loss. Just as the first hint of gray light touched the eastern sky, she saw it, a faint, flickering light ahead, a cabin, smoke curled from its chimney. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. They had made it. With the last of her strength, she half dragged, half carried Xavier toward the light, her voice a raw croak as she called for help. The cabin door opened, and a grizzled old man with a long white beard and a rifle stood silhouetted in the doorway. He looked from the blood-soaked, half-frozen woman to the unconscious man she was holding up. "Good Lord, child," the old prospector breathed, lowering his rifle. "Get him inside. Quick now." They had found a stranger's mercy in the wilderness. The old prospector, a man named Silas, was a hermit who wanted nothing to do with the politics of the territory. He knew enough about wounds and frostbite to keep Xavier alive. For 2 days, Aurora and Silas nursed him, boiling water, changing bandages, forcing broth between his lips. The ranch felt 1,000,000 miles away. On the 3rd day, Xavier's fever broke. His eyes fluttered open, clear for the first time. He looked at Aurora, asleep in a chair by his cot, her hands raw and bandaged from the rope burns. He reached out and weakly touched her hand. "You saved me," he whispered. She woke with a start, her eyes filling with tears of relief. "You would have done the same." "You held the rope," he said, a look of wonder on his face. A small, weary smile touched her lips. "Some things," she said softly, "are more frightening than old ghosts. The thought of losing you." Her voice broke. He squeezed her hand. "When I was on that bridge, all I could think about was that I'd never told you." He paused, gathering his strength. "I love you, Aurora. Your courage, your fire, everything." "I love you too," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him gently. "I think I have since the day you called me out on my lies." Their fragile peace was shattered the next afternoon by the sound of approaching horses. Silas peered out the window. "Riders coming, a whole posse of them." Aurora's blood ran cold. It was the sheriff. He had found them. She grabbed the pistol Xavier had given her and the ledger. There was no more running. "Silas, stay out of this," she said, helping Xavier to his feet. He was still weak, but he could stand. They slipped out the back of the cabin just as Sheriff Bennett and a dozen armed men surrounded it. They hid in a thicket of pines, their hearts pounding. "We know you're in there," Bennett's voice boomed. "Come out with the girl, Sullivan, and we'll make it quick." Suddenly, another group of riders appeared from the opposite direction. They weren't ranch hands. They were uniformed men, disciplined and heavily armed, U.S. Marshals. At their lead was a familiar figure, Mrs. Montgomery, looking regal and in control. But something was wrong. Her hands were bound in front of her. A marshal with a silver badge dismounted. "Sheriff Bennett, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and illegal transport of federal assets." Bennett stared, his face a mask of disbelief. "What is this? She's the one you want," he yelled, pointing at the captive Mrs. Montgomery. The marshal ignored him, turning his attention to the cabin. "Miss Zimmerman, Xavier Sullivan, it's over. You're safe now." Slowly, Aurora and Xavier emerged from the trees. The marshal tipped his hat. "We received a telegram 2 days ago from a Mr. Silas. Seems he took a little ride to the nearest telegraph station after you two passed out." Aurora looked at the old prospector, who gave her a sly wink from his doorway. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Another figure dismounted from the marshal's posse. A woman dressed in fine Eastern clothes who ran toward Aurora, her face streaked with tears. "Aurora!" Aurora stared in disbelief. "Clara!" It was her sister. The sister she had been writing to all along. "Your letters," Clara sobbed, hugging her. "They sounded so false, so cheerful. I knew something was wrong. When you wrote about the foreman, Mr. Sullivan, I hired a private investigator to look into him, an agent from the Pinkerton Detective Agency." She turned and pointed to the lead marshal, who took off his hat and looked at Xavier with a wry smile. "Agent Harris," he said, "your temporary replacement." It all clicked into place. The final, unbelievable twist. Xavier wasn't just Daniel's brother seeking revenge. He was an undercover Pinkerton agent hired by the government months ago to investigate the illegal gold shipments from Willow Creek. His search for his brother had merged with his official investigation. He had been playing a role the entire time, just as she had. They were two spies, circling each other, each thinking the other was the criminal. "You're a Pinkerton," Aurora breathed, looking at Xavier. He gave her a tired, sheepish grin. "I was about to ask you the same thing." The truth, in the end, was stranger and more complicated than any lie they had told. As the marshals led the cuffed Sheriff Bennett and a snarling Mrs. Montgomery away, Xavier turned to Aurora, his eyes full of a future she never thought she'd have. "I told you this land has a way of drawing out stories," he said softly. "It seems it has a way of starting them, too," she replied, taking his uninjured hand. The rope hadn't been a symbol of her past trauma. It had been the tool of her salvation, the weapon of her vengeance, and the lifeline that had delivered her to the truth. In the crisp Colorado air, surrounded by the wreckage of lies, they stood together, two survivors who had found each other in the heart of the storm. Their life could finally begin. They were married a month later under the wide-open Colorado sky. The ranch, now under federal receivership, was quiet, healing. Aurora didn't take the teaching job again. Instead, she and Xavier bought a small plot of land of their own, a place to build a new life far from the shadows of Willow Creek. Xavier left the Pinkertons, his last case closed. The ledger she had fought so hard for became evidence in a trial that rocked the territory, exposing a web of corruption that reached all the way to Denver. Aurora never lost her fear of ropes entirely. It was a scar, a part of her story, but it no longer controlled her. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would hold Xavier's hand and trace the faint scars on his palms, a mirror of the ones on her own. They were reminders of the fire they had walked through together, reminders that the strongest bonds are often forged in the most terrifying of circumstances, and that sometimes the very thing you fear the most is the only thing that can set you free. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next strange, dark, and mysterious tale.